For centuries, we've been told the story of creation begins in a garden. But what if the Garden of Eden wasn't the beginning? What if it was the end of something far older, more advanced, and almost entirely erased from human history? Scholars have pored over ancient texts, seeking hidden meanings. Yet, few have dared to ask the most heretical question of all. Could the Bible be encoding the story of a lost civilization, not metaphorically, but literally? Enter Lemuria. This name haunts the edges of myth, dismissed by mainstream science, yet preserved in the whispers of indigenous elders, secret societies, and esoteric traditions across the globe. What if the reason we can't find it on any modern map is because its memory has been buried beneath allegory and scripture? What if key verses in the Old Testament, from the fall of man to the enigmatic Nephilim, are actually veiled references to Lemuria's own fall from spiritual grace? In this exploration, we will unravel suppressed clues hidden in plain sight. We'll delve into ancient symbology, decode biblical metaphors, and reveal the stunning parallels between Lemurian wisdom and the teachings of Jesus himself. If you think you know the Bible, prepare to see it through a lens so ancient it predates religion as we know it. This isn't conspiracy. It's history rewritten, repressed, and now, finally remembered. The whispers of a golden age. Lemuria revealed. Long before the rise of Atlantis, before Egypt, Sumer, and even the oldest Vedic hymns, there existed a civilization spoken of in whispers across continents. Lemuria. Unlike Atlantis, often portrayed as a hub of technological arrogance, Lemuria was remembered as a peaceful, heart-centered civilization that lived in harmony with nature, the stars, and each other. The very name Lemuria evokes something deep, something almost familiar, as if our DNA recognizes the word even when our minds dismiss it. References to a sunken land in the Pacific or Indian Ocean appear in ancient Tamil legends, in Polynesian chants, in Aboriginal Dreamtime stories, and in esoteric texts like those of Theosophy and Helena Blavatsky. Even in early geological theories, Lemuria was proposed as a lost landmass to explain the presence of lemur fossils across disconnected continents. But far more intriguing than fossils are the spiritual fossils, the echoes of memory passed down through myths, dreams, and visions from sages and mystics across the ages. Lemuria was said to be a continent of great spiritual refinement. Its people were not only intuitive, they were telepathic. There were no spoken words because thought was enough. Conflict was rare because unity consciousness was the norm. They believed in the sacredness of life, the interconnectedness of all beings, and the idea that each soul is a unique expression of divine light. Their temples weren't built from stone, but from harmonics, light, and crystalline energy. But what happened to them? As Earth's magnetic field began to shift, and as certain souls began experimenting with separation, ego, and control, the Lemurian frequency began to fragment. Some Lemurians chose to leave, to rise into higher dimensions. Others stayed and fell spiritually and physically. The continent, according to esoteric traditions, eventually sank beneath the ocean, taking with it libraries of spiritual knowledge, advanced vibrational technologies, and perhaps most tragically, the memory of what it meant to live in true harmony. And yet, not all was lost. Fragments of Lemurian wisdom survived. They were carried by travelers, passed into oral traditions, and hidden in coded symbols across civilizations. The echoes in Eden, decoding Genesis. Here's the twist. Some of the most compelling evidence that Lemuria once existed is hidden not in obscure scrolls or fringe folklore, but in the most widely read spiritual text in human history, the Bible. Could it? Let's go back to the book of Genesis, not as believers or skeptics, but as investigators. The story begins with a Garden Eden, a paradise where humans walked with God, unashamed, in harmony with nature. But almost immediately, things take a sharp turn. Disobedience, a serpent, a mysterious knowledge of good and evil, and then the fall, banishment from the garden, and the beginning of human suffering. On the surface, it reads like a myth about morality. But beneath that, something deeper may be encoded, something far older. What if Eden wasn't Earth's beginning, but its second act? The descriptions of Eden, its beauty, peace, and divine communion sound eerily similar to Lemurian lore. In both traditions, Early humans lived in direct connection with the divine. In both, there was no conflict, no ego, no separation. And in both, something happened that caused a sudden rupture, a descent, a forgetting. Genesis tells us that the sin was eating from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. But from an esoteric perspective, this wasn't just about disobedience. It was about a shift in consciousness, the beginning of duality, judgment, and self-awareness separated from source. In Lemurian tradition, the downfall came when certain beings began experimenting with individuality, power, and control, moving away from collective unity. This spiritual descent mirrors the biblical fall not just as a punishment, but as a shift in vibration. The serpent, long demonized as Satan, has far older roots in ancient symbology. In Lemurian and later Gnostic traditions, the serpent wasn't evil but represented wisdom, kundalini energy, or the coiled DNA of divine consciousness. Could it be that the biblical serpent was misunderstood, even intentionally rebranded? Moreover, notice how Adam and Eve realized they were naked after the fall. Symbolically, this reflects the loss of light-body awareness, a key Lemurian concept. In ancient metaphysics, higher beings were said to glow with radiant energy. The nakedness wasn't physical shame. It was the realization of separation from that divine luminescence. Even the guarded gates of Eden, watched over by cherubim and a flaming sword, resemble the mythical stories of sacred Lemurian temples protected by energy fields and beings of light. Could Eden have been a memory of the final Lemurian sanctuaries? And could the expulsion be the trauma of a collective collapse encoded in scripture for millennia? There's a reason the earliest parts of Genesis feel like a riddle. The narrative is sparse, the symbols are dense, and the tone is ancient, as if it's echoing something older than the Hebrew language itself. What if we've been reading Genesis not as the origin, but as a coded memory of the Lemurian fall? The serpent, the tree, the fall, the exile, these are not just religious metaphors. They may be mythic fingerprints, fragments of a story much bigger than we've been told. The Nephilim connection, hybrid echoes of a lost age. One of the most mysterious passages in the entire Bible appears almost abruptly in Genesis 6. The sons of God saw that the daughters of men were beautiful and they took them as wives. The result? A race of giants, the Nephilim. Who were these beings? Why does the Bible give them only a few verses then quickly move on to Noah and the flood? And why do their brief appearances feel like remnants of a much older and suppressed story? From the Lemurian perspective, these beings, the Nephilim, may have been hybrid remnants of the Lemurian age. After the fall of Lemuria, not all knowledge was lost. Some of the more advanced Lemurians, particularly those with interdimensional or stellar origins, sought to preserve what they could. Esoteric traditions speak of interbreeding between these higher dimensional Lemurian beings and early humans, not just biologically but energetically. This interbreeding, when seen through a symbolic lens, may represent the transfer of Lemurian DNA, spiritual codes, and ancient wisdom into new vessels. But something went wrong. As the Earth's vibrational field became denser, many of these hybrids began to lose touch with the purity of their origins. The result, according to both biblical and extra-biblical texts like the Book of Enoch, was a generation of beings who possessed great power but lacked restraint. They taught forbidden knowledge, sorcery, weaponry, manipulation of nature, echoes of what Lemurians warned against before their fall. In essence, the Nephilim weren't just physical giants. They were spiritual anomalies born at a time when higher wisdom clashed with rising ego and materialism. This also parallels myths from other cultures. The demigods of Greece, the Devas and Asuras of India, or even the feathered serpent beings of Mesoamerica. In nearly all cases, these hybrid entities were portrayed as both divine and dangerous, misunderstood, feared, or revered. So why would the Bible mention them at all? Because it had to. The memory was too deeply embedded in the collective psyche to be completely erased. But by reducing the Nephilim to a footnote just before the story of the flood, the biblical editors may have been sanitizing a much deeper truth, that Lemurian bloodlines and spiritual legacies didn't end with the continent's disappearance. They continued, hidden in lineages, in symbols, and in select individuals who remembered. Even today, some spiritual lineages believe that certain people carry these ancient Lemurian codes, not in their physical DNA, but in their soul memory. They may feel different, drawn to the stars, or obsessed with ancient wisdom they've never been taught. Some call them star seeds. Others call them old souls. But perhaps they are simply the echoes of Lemuria, living, breathing reminders of a forgotten chapter in our human story, now reawakening. The Christ consciousness and Lemurian wisdom. Nowhere does the hidden legacy of Lemuria shine more brilliantly than in the teachings of one of history's most enigmatic figures, Jesus. While mainstream theology emphasizes his divine birth, death, and resurrection, there is a layer of his message that resonates not just with Jewish prophecy, but with something far more ancient. When we examine his teachings through a metaphysical lens, we begin to see striking similarities with what Lemurian sages once taught. Let's begin with one of his most famous statements. The kingdom of heaven is within you. This is not the language of institutional religion. This is the language of inner gnosis, of consciousness, of awakening to the divine spark within a core tenet of Lemurian philosophy. The Lemurians believed that each being was a reflection of source, and that separation from divinity was an illusion created by the ego. Salvation for them was not a future reward, but a present realization, exactly what Jesus taught. Next, consider his emphasis on healing, not through ritual or sacrifice, but through vibration, touch, and intention. Jesus healed with sound, word, frequency, and energy, precisely the tools said to be used by Lemurian healers. The Lemurians understood the human body as a living crystal, responsive to emotional, energetic, and harmonic states. Diseases were distortions of frequency, not punishments. Healing was restoration of resonance, a view that aligns more with quantum metaphysics than with first-century medical practices. Jesus also taught in parables not just for accessibility, but to protect deeper truths from the unready. Lemurian teachers did the same. Truth was not to be handed to the uninitiated, but discovered by the seeker. When asked why he spoke in riddles, Jesus replied, "Because the secrets of the kingdom are given to you but not to them." This mirrors ancient mystery school logic, including the Lemurian belief in initiation through remembrance rather than dogma. But what about the missing years? The Bible is silent about Jesus from ages 12 to 30, a near two-decade gap. Esoteric traditions, particularly from India and Tibet, claim that Jesus, or Isa, traveled through Asia, studying with yogis, Buddhist monks, and spiritual masters. Some even suggest he journeyed to the Himalayas, where remnants of Lemurian wisdom still survived in secret enclaves. If this is true, it would explain why his teachings later combined Jewish mysticism with ideas that echoed Eastern and Lemurian metaphysics. Karma, compassion, energy healing, and direct communion with God. There's also the matter of the Gnostic Gospels, scriptures omitted from the canon by early church councils. In texts like the Gospel of Thomas, Gospel of Mary, and Pistis Sophia, Jesus speaks not as a savior demanding worship, but as a guide awakening students to inner divinity. He speaks of light realms, soul ascension, multidimensionality, concepts strikingly similar to Lemurian cosmology. In fact, many Gnostic texts were labeled heretical precisely because they didn't support a hierarchy of priests, but empowered individuals to seek the light within. The deeper question then is this: was Jesus a reincarnated Lemurian avatar? Or perhaps was he a soul who had once walked Lemurian soil, returning to reawaken humanity to a long-lost spiritual path? Regardless of your personal belief, the overlap is undeniable. His message was not one of control but liberation. Not sin and guilt but unity and light. His path was not about escape from earth but transformation of it. This is exactly what the Lemurians believed. And perhaps it's no accident that their frequency is rising again, just as the world begins to question old paradigms and return to the sacred truths hidden in plain sight, including those buried within the Bible itself. The deliberate concealment. Why Lemuria vanished from history. If ancient Lemurian knowledge did in fact survive the cataclysmic fall, the obvious question arises: where did it go? How did such profound wisdom about the soul, frequency, the cosmos, and the sacred nature of life vanish from collective memory? The answer, as always, lies not in its disappearance, but in its deliberate concealment. As dominant religions and empires rose, the old esoteric systems became a threat. The early church, in particular, sought to centralize spiritual authority, eliminate heterodoxy, and codify dogma. Any text, group, or symbol that pointed toward direct spiritual experience, especially one that bypassed priests and power structures, was either destroyed, demonized, or absorbed. This is where symbolism became the perfect disguise. Take the serpent, for example. In Lemurian and other ancient traditions, the serpent symbolized Kundalini energy, the divine life force that rises through the chakras, awakening higher consciousness. But in post-Eden biblical theology, the serpent was twisted into a deceiver, Satan in reptilian form. A sacred emblem of wisdom was inverted into a cautionary tale. Or look at the tree of life. In Kabbalah and Gnostic Christianity, the tree is a map of consciousness, a pathway of soul ascension. In Genesis, it's guarded by angels, off-limits, dangerous. One must ask, was the tree forbidden because it held power, or because it offered freedom? Throughout history, secret societies emerged to preserve what could not be taught openly. The Essenes, often linked to Jesus and John the Baptist, practiced mystical rites, lived in harmony with nature, and taught reincarnation, all echoes of Lemurian values. Later, the Gnostics were brutally suppressed for claiming that salvation came not through obedience but through gnosis, direct knowledge of divine truth. And then there were the Cathars, who saw the material world as a trap and believed in the divine spark within all beings. They were exterminated in one of the bloodiest campaigns in church history. After them came the Rosicrucians, the Freemasons, and other esoteric orders who encoded ancient wisdom into rituals, architecture, and alchemical symbols, a lineage that may trace back in spirit, if not in name, to the Lemurian priesthoods. Even modern churches are built upon foundations rich in esoteric geometry. The rose windows of Gothic cathedrals, the serpent crossing rods on ancient altars, the hidden meanings behind the number 12 or 33, these are not random. They are keys left in plain sight for those with the eyes to see. And that's the point. Lemurian knowledge was never truly lost. It was hidden in parables, hidden in stained glass, hidden in symbols we pass every day but no longer recognize. The suppression wasn't about ignorance. It was about control. Because a spiritually sovereign human being, one who remembers their divine origin and inner power, cannot be ruled. Yet something is shifting. These symbols are coming alive again. People are remembering dreams, receiving downloads, drawn to frequencies they can't explain. It's as if the codes are reactivating, not because someone allowed it, but because time itself is ripening. The veil is thinning, the old is crumbling, and the Lemurian frequency is rising again. The awakening within Lemuria's return. As we explore these mysteries, it's natural to ask, is there any real evidence that Lemuria ever existed? That these teachings aren't just beautiful mythology but fragments of a forgotten history? While mainstream archaeology scoffs at the idea of sunken continents, anomalies persist, and they're becoming harder to ignore. Consider the ruins beneath the sea off the coast of Yanaguni, Japan. Massive megalithic structures with right angles and staircase-like formations carved into stone, submerged for thousands of years. Or the legends of Mu passed down through Polynesian and Hawaiian oral tradition. Stories that describe a peaceful land that sank beneath the waves after a great war or catastrophe. In India, ancient Tamil texts speak of Kumari Kandam, a continent south of present-day India lost to the ocean in a cataclysm. These accounts, dismissed as folklore, echo precisely the same themes as Lemurian lore: advanced spiritual knowledge, great temples of light, and a deep harmony with the earth. Even language carries faint traces. Certain root syllables like mulu and ra appear across seemingly unrelated ancient tongues, possibly remnants of a primordial language predating recorded history. These are not coincidences. They are linguistic fossils, clues pointing back to a time when humanity spoke from the heart, not just the tongue. But the strongest evidence is not under the ocean or in stone. It's in us. Many today feel a strange pull, a longing for something lost, a deep ache to remember. Some experience vivid dreams of temples that don't exist or landscapes that feel like home but don't appear on any map. Others report encounters with beings of light, spontaneous downloads of sacred geometry, or intense empathy with Earth's suffering. These are not delusions. These are the reawakenings of soul memory. You might be one of them. Spiritual teachers today often speak of the Lemurian awakening, The idea that as Earth's frequency rises, those with dormant Lemurian codes are beginning to activate. These individuals may feel hypersensitive, intuitive, and out of place in modern society. They are drawn to healing arts, to light work, to collective harmony, not as a philosophy but as a remembering. Even modern science is brushing against ancient truths. Quantum physics now tells us that the observer shapes reality, that the universe is interconnected at a fundamental level, and that vibration underlies matter, concepts Lemurians lived by long ago. Crystals, once dismissed as superstition, are now central to computing and communication. Energy medicine, once mocked, is gaining legitimacy in cutting-edge fields. It's as if the world is catching up to what Lemuria once knew. And what of the Bible? Consider the metaphor of resurrection. The dead rising, the lost being found, the blind seeing. What if this isn't just personal salvation, but the resurrection of an ancient consciousness? What if the second coming isn't just a figure, but a frequency, the return of unity consciousness, the rebirth of Lemuria through us? We were never meant to worship ancient truths. We were meant to embody them. As Earth undergoes massive shifts, climate, consciousness, chaos, and awakening, the forgotten frequencies are stirring. The veil between worlds is thinning. Symbols hidden for millennia are reactivating. And beneath all the noise, a deep, resonant pulse can be felt. The heartbeat of Lemuria, calling us home. The real question is not did Lemuria exist, but what part of it still lives in you? Because the Lemurian return isn't about finding ruins or deciphering old texts. It's about recognizing that the temple was never lost. It was always within. If you've made it this far, something in you is stirring. Perhaps a memory, perhaps a frequency, or maybe just a quiet knowing that what we've been told is only part of the story. The tale of Lemuria is not about convincing the rational mind. It's about awakening the inner compass. It's not a theory. It's a mirror. And when you hold it up to the deepest part of yourself, you may start to see who you truly are. Not just a body, not just a personality, but a timeless consciousness with roots older than any written history. Maybe you've had dreams of walking in crystal temples surrounded by golden light. Maybe you've always felt different, drawn to healing, to harmony, to higher truths, even when you didn't have the words for it. These are not fantasies. They're fragments, echoes, pieces of a puzzle you've carried across lifetimes. And that puzzle is coming together now, because we are entering a time when forgotten truths are reawakening, when buried frequencies rise to the surface, and when ancient wisdom calls out not from history books, but from within your soul. The Bible may have been edited, censored, and retranslated, but its core still holds light for those with eyes to see. The fall, the serpent, the tree of life, the Nephilim, the parables of Jesus, they are all puzzle pieces. When placed in the context of Lemuria, they don't contradict faith. They expand it. They invite us not just to believe, but to remember. So I invite you now to reflect. What ancient memory lives inside you? What wisdom have you carried across time, waiting for this very moment to awaken? Leave a comment below. Have you ever felt a deep connection to Lemuria or had dreams that felt older than time? Are there verses in the Bible that suddenly make more sense through this lens? Your voice matters because you're not alone. There are others like you remembering too. If this message resonated, like, share, and subscribe to Wisdom of the Ancients. Every week we uncover the buried stories, hidden frequencies, and sacred truths they didn't want you to remember. Until now.